Hi there, I'm Linda Banfalvi. Welcome to my studio. I'm here doing a small painting that's 16 by 16 inches, and I'm working with oil and cold wax medium. I'm a mixed media artist, so I often work with different medias, but for this demonstration, I'll be just working with oil paint and cold wax medium. If you're interested in more information, details of how I mix my paint, prepare my panels, many different techniques that I use painting oil and cold wax, I have a course on my website, lindabanfalvi.com, so feel free to have a look at that. And there's a more extensive course that will show you the little things that you probably want to know for this YouTube demo. I am just doing the demonstration and then just giving you a little insight as to my process and what I'm thinking. The first part of this painting, the last few demonstrations that I've done for YouTube, I have done the same way, where I've started with a warm, transparent color mixture for the first layer. And I like to do that to set up the light in the painting and a warm glow. And I start using a lot of warm colors because I know that I'm going to be using a lot of cool colors, so it sets up a nice vibration for my the cool colors that are going to come in the future. One of my recent demonstrations on YouTube, I did fall colors. I think I called it River of Dreams. And so basically it spurred the inspiration for this painting, because in that painting I had part of the landscape with trees and reflected colors into the water with rocks and moving water. And I decided that for this painting, I wanted to have a zoomed in focus of just the rocks and the water, very abstractly create those feelings in a more zoomed in abstract way. This one is called Rocks and Water because I wanted to show you how I set up my composition. And so I've added some transparent orange, and I'm starting to draw out my composition design as to where I want to place the rocks, the darker values in the painting. And then I'm smoothing things out a little. Notice how I'm just doing big gestural strokes. Doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be neat and tidy, and I'm not painting perfect little rocks. I'm just creating the illusion and the feeling of the rocks with moving water going around the rocks, which I find really fascinating when I sit and watch beside the river. The whole idea is to just recreate the feeling of the rocks with moving water. So here I'm adding some darker value. This is asphaltum oil paint with cold wax medium, and I'm stating where my darker values are going to be in the square. The composition is square. I know that most of the dark is up at the top. I need to make a way to get up to the top and decide where my focal area is going to be. Is it going to be at the top? Is it going to be right at the bottom, or which side? I usually think in terms of a grid system, and you divide your panel into a third and a third, and then where those lines meet, that might be a good spot to put a focal point. And usually if I'm going to have a simple composition like this, I'm going to have my focal point Probably if I had the biggest rocks or cluster of rocks as my focal point, and in the foreground more, because in the foreground there will be more detail, more contrast, it might make more sense for this composition. So my focal point will be in the bottom left quadrant of the painting. So I've already set the stepping stones of rocks and where they're going to be approximately placed. So you can kind of see my composition coming together here. And I'm just starting to modify some of the darks by putting in some green colors, because the green is a nice mix with the blues and the lighter values when I start to add those. I mix a lot of all of my paint on the panel. I'm just applying it and blending, creating a little bit of vibration and gestural marks, even though those won't be there totally. They'll be covered up partially, but it'll still create a liveliness to areas that are not as important. So this process, I find, can be very intuitive, and I'll put something down, I'll put a mark down or a shape, and then I will move on to other areas and work the whole panel. And as I proceed, I will sometimes inadvertently get rid of shapes that I liked before, or that I will have to restate further on in the painting process. But I try not to get too attached to areas at the beginning of the painting process. I let it get to a nice hot mess, is how I like to call it, a little bit of chaos, to create the energy and the feeling of the movement of the water. I find it helps to have a little bit of serendipity happening. It makes it more interesting to look at. And now I'm adding some a light value opaque paint. And this happens to be iridescent blue. Very, very light pale, but it does have a mauvey blue tone to it. And it sets up a beautiful vibration with the warm oranges and yellows that I already have on the panel. Scraping away. If I scraped away too much, you can just add more. Back and forth from light to dark, warm and cool. It's a constant looking to see what I've done, and that tells me what I need to do next. Very intuitive process. At the same time, I do have an idea in mind that, my main goal is painting rocks in water and the movement of water. All my strokes are designed to try to recreate that concept. So there is a bit of a rhyme and a reason to what I'm doing and how I do it. But I'm looking as I go and deciding, oh yeah, well that worked, this didn't. Let's see how I can change that. And it's a constant adjusting. And one of the things to note in this painting is that there's a little bit of aerial perspective going on, where items like the rocks and some of the movement of the water that's in the foreground will be larger shapes. And as you recede into the picture plane, things get a little bit smaller as you move backwards to create the illusion of distance. So I'm constantly playing with that idea, because with a composition like this that is fairly simplified, there's not a lot of other things happening in this. that is one tool that really helps to create that illusion. And now I'm adding some teal, some radiant turquoise. This is another opaque color. I like the combination of those two opaque colors. And I like how it mixes in with the browns and the oranges that are already on the painting. And I just love how that turquoise and the yellow and oranges vibrate, because I'm going to continue to let some of those underpainting colors shine through as I keep going. Not all of the turquoise will be seen, but I'm just setting up the layers. I work the whole painting. I try not to focus in one area for too long. As I keep building, I want to work the whole painting and try to balance the color. If I add a new color, then I'm going to try to balance that throughout the composition. And if I add too much of it in one area, as I continue on building my layers, I will minimize some areas that pull my eye away from the focal point, things like that. So now I'm working a little bit more on the focal point area, which is the largest rock in the foreground. I'm using a lighter value. It's not completely white, it's a warm white. It's like titanium, but a little bit of warmth in there. I'm using that to start to create a little bit of the highlights into the water movement. And here I'm scraping out a little bit into the rock and deciding maybe it was too dark, maybe it was too light. I try that on for size and then work on something else. And then I'll come back to it and modify that again. It's part of not falling in love with an area too soon. Otherwise, you're too worried about ruining things. You're worried to obliterate something that you really like, but the thing is, you can always just change it a little bit. Usually, if you can keep yourself loose and not too worried about precious areas, you'll end up getting magic more often than a disaster. And then you start working, okay, if you get a disaster, well, you can scrape it off a little and then restate the area, or you can modify it somehow to make it work. That's the beauty of working with these oils, with the layers, is that you have time to work with it and to decide whether you like it. As you proceed, things start to set up just a little bit with the cold wax, a little faster than with oils. And so it allows you the ability to continue with your modifications and layering sooner than just straight oils, I find. And the beautiful textures that you can get with the cold wax added to the paint, I love that. I love working with those textures. And even marks and scrapes that you make early on in the process, even if you end up covering them up, they still have an effect on the painting as a whole. Usually there's parts of it that are still evident, or the way the paint mixes with the next layer. So it's a process that I've learned to trust, that Eventually I'll make it work to create the feeling that I'm after. I'm not looking for perfection all the way through. I'm just looking for a feeling and for interesting color passages, values. There are nice movements with the values and how you orchestrate all of those things. And here I'm adjusting the dark value again because I wanted some really nice contrasts. And I want to lead your eye through the composition so there's little stepping stones along the way. We're getting closer to the end where I'm starting to fine tune some of the shapes. Minimizing some of the areas that I find distracting. I'm restating the dark values, adding a few more rocks here and there. When you look at when I show the last picture of the finished painting, I actually added an extra little rock afterwards, so you can have a look. Sometimes, you need to step away from the painting, and then you say, well, you know what, there's too much, I don't like the spacing between the rocks, so you could just change things a little bit. It's always good to step away and then have another look. I'm really enjoying the alternation of warm and cool. Like even within the cool colors, there's an alternation with warm and cool blues. And then there's, the warmth from the underpainting and some of the greens that are mixing in. The green gold, I love that color to mix in with the browns and then the blue layers on top. Because I don't want my eye to be caught out into the water area for too long, I want you to go there but then come back to the rocks in the focal area. So I'm smoothing out some areas to try to create some areas of calm, to sort of balance the movement of the water and that sort of thing. Now I'm playing with little edges. If there's an edge that catches my eye, I'm going to soften it out. Or if I'm just playing with little edges and the passages. As I look along the outside of my painting, along the edges of the square, I want to make sure there's interesting alternations of value and color. And if there's an area that's got too much, like here, I'm softening out some of that turquoise and adding another layer of the first blue color. And I'm not getting rid of all of it, and I'm sort of alternating on that lower edge. You can see how it alternates a little bit more from turquoise to that pale blue to turquoise again. So I'm constantly modifying those edges along the painting. I'm thinking of the painting as a square or a rectangle, depending on what I'm working on. And, you have to balance that whole square. And I'm always thinking about having interesting edges all the way around, having ways for the eye to follow throughout the composition, to lead you around and then back to the focal area. And here I'm pulling out, like I'm sort of lifting and scraping down to try to alter the darkness of it. It was just a little too dark out on that edge for me. And now I'm adding in a little bit more of the green gold that I had put in before. And sometimes when I scrape out of an area, the paint that's left on my scraper, I'll just add it. Put it back somewhere else. And you want to make sure you have unity in the whole thing. So, I'm looking at the whole thing thinking, well, I need to calm some areas down and not have it quite as important as other areas. But it still reads as a dark value along the top, and then there's more middle value happening a little bit lower down. Now I'm playing with a little bit more mark making and creating some line work, and then softening it out because I thought, okay, well, maybe that's just a little too much. So you have time to play around and decide whether it's working or not for you. So now I'm going back in with the lightest light, and I'm trying to create some strong strokes. It's almost like brush stroke work, but it's not I don't use a brush for this whole painting. I'm using that Messermeister scraper, the bowl scraper. I love using that for most of my paintings. Some paintings which you'll see coming up that I'll be using other things like rollers, and I like to use rubber brayers that are designed for printmaking. I'm pulling some of that light value over top of the rock to maybe create the illusion that water is like pouring over top of that rock, and it breaks the paint a little bit up and creates a nice texture there. It's hard to see, I think, with the film, like with my lighting in the studio camera, it tends to make it look all very light, but there's a little bit more nuance within the values when you look at the painting when it's finished. But I'm actually kind of just playing with those things right now. But scraping there, I scraped out a little chunk because it was just a little too light there for me, so I brought back a little of the underpainting. There I dragged a little dark, so I end up softening that out a bit. So you can't really make a mistake, because if you do a mark and you think it's awful, or you add paint, you can just scrape it back out and then put another color or another value. And that's what painting for me is all about. It's looking at your shapes, your values, your colors, your edges, how you have nice movement coming through, texture. I love all of those elements in my painting, and I just want to make sure that it feels right to me, and that's how I know when the painting's finished. When all the things feel right. And if I sit back and I think, well, you know what? I don't think there's anything else I need to do to this to create the illusion that I'm looking for and the feeling that I originally wanted to create. Now, did you see how I just changed that edge there, and I modified it with light over top of the middle value, and it creates a really nice little vibration of the thicker paint on top of the thinner. It makes you feel like there's water moving from the top coming down to the bottom. I'm just balancing that out a little bit around the rocks and adding some light value along that left-hand edge because it's dominantly dark, but I'm putting a little bit of light in there as well because the eye will follow those contrasts. sometimes a little finger painting's in order to smudge something, or, you know, whatever works. There's no right or wrong. And here I'm adding the lights, but I'm starting to blend it right into that middle value dark. Some of those colors there are all just blending in. By some of them being soft as I recede into the background, it creates the illusion of distance. When I was doing this, I thought, oh, you know what? It looks like there's a little bit of a tiny water drop, little waterfall there. I think I'm just going to leave that, even though I didn't originally plan to do that. But I liked it, and it served its purpose in terms of composition for me. So I thought, yeah, that's okay. And you as the artist, you get to edit what you like and what you don't like. You know, you get to tell the story. So my story might not be the same as your story. You might like something else. That's your job to decide what's important for you to express in your paintings. And there's, you know, the possibilities are endless. And I want to encourage you to think about that and keep painting and have fun, fearless painting, because there's no such thing as a mistake. Just really enjoy the process and get absorbed and have fun with it. I really enjoyed painting this, and I hope that you enjoyed watching it, seeing how it changed over the painting process. And as I said, the finished painting, I added one more little dark between the two top rocks, just a smaller one to break up the space division between the rocks. Those little tiny things, they're the little final things that you take a little more time and after you've stepped away. And here we are. You can see the colors a little better in this clip. I think it looks like rocks with water moving. There's nice vibrations. Join me again in my studio for more painting demonstrations on YouTube. And please check out my website, lindabanfalvi.com, and like and subscribe if this is of interest to you and you want to see more, because I plan on putting up a lot more demonstrations in the coming year.